All systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of Leverage Lane here on the Ship It Nation YouTube station. Make sure to tap that thumbs up on the way in and subscribe to the channel for all of our free shows. Got my man Alex Blickle here with me, as always, going to be breaking down all things Week 14 NFL DFS DraftKings from a single entry GPP perspective. It's not Narrative Street, it's Leverage Lane. It's the name for a reason. 3 segments. We're going to go through the ownership, what we're seeing across the industry, where we see maybe some discrepancies and whatnot. Then we'll get to sort of what the common build looks like from there. Second segment, we'll dive in to see how to leverage the common build and what we can do in some game stacks, some partnerships or pairings within the tournaments and whatnot. And then, of course, at the end, we will give our light at the end of the lane. We got our leverage lane for the week. Alex, my man, back from a holiday week. How's your week going so far, my friend? Excited for this week 14 ahead.
It's good. Yeah, we talked a little bit about this slate already kind of ahead of the show, but this is as like unclear as I've been about what I'm going to play, what games I'm going to attack, because I've been kind of all season for a slate. This is a really difficult slate, but I think that kind of works in our favor. And these are the kinds of slates that I think are the most fun to just kind of quote unquote solve. Like we did a mastermind show together, and we talked about how you and I both kind of see DFS similarly, where every week, every slate is its own puzzle that we're trying to solve, its own riddle that we're trying to, work through and figure out the best solution to. And this is kind of the epitome of that, this slate. So very much looking forward to talking through this. So I was talking with the guys in my Discord already where, I kind of love the fact that we do Leverage Lane now, because I think this next hour could actually really help me to kind of clarify and organize my thoughts about the slate. And maybe an hour from now, I'll feel a lot more, convicted about what I'm going to play this week than I do right now.
Yeah, a lot of similarities when it comes to that stuff. And I think that's the interesting part about it is, we want to shape our own thoughts for the week. It helps with that. It hopefully helps you guys out there shape the way you think about the week. I mean, we had a few good comments on the way in. Shout out to my man, Rick. He says, best show in the industry. And I made it live. Let's have a week, nation. Newens is always in here early, as is Philly Phantom. Joanne. I like this comment, though. It says, this show has turned into my favorite NFL show of the week. And I watch hours and hours of this stuff every day. I think a lot of people do take in a lot of the content across the industry. So we certainly appreciate that. And I'm in a, Tambo Claus kind of mood. And it is, for everybody celebrates different holidays, but for us, Merry Shipmas out there to everybody as the holiday season. And I'm in a giving mood. So let us know in the chat, or if you watch this on replay or playback, let us know what your favorite part about this show is. I know everyone says we love the content, we love the show, we love whatever. What is your favorite part of Leverage Lane? Let us know. And I'm going to give away a month of all access with SaberSim to Ship It Nation to somebody before next week. But just I want to see in the comments too. So we'll check back. We always read the comments in case you can't catch it live. But I thought this same person said what you just said in a different way. There is a lot of good plays around the same price points. And when we get to it in a second, Alex, you'll see that there's like there's lots of running backs, but it kind of boils down to 5, I feel like, give or take. And then 2 or 3 of them, whether you play a 2 or 3 running back lineup or not. And then after that, you can fit like any stack around it. Whether you want to go with the Lamar stack, a Burrow stack, Tyler Shuck stack, whatever you're going with, there's kind of a way to make that fit around the other stuff. But another key point on this slate, and I'll let you take it from here, is, who are some of these chalkier options? A lot of them are in the afternoon. Well, there's only 3 afternoon games though. So give us your thoughts on that. Let's start it off from there.
Yeah, it's a really unique slate in that regard, because typically when you only have 3 late games, there aren't that many guys in those 3 games that a lot of people are going to play. And so it typically presents like a really nice kind of a late swap opportunity where, okay, you've got a few chalk options and then you have a bunch of contrarian options. And so you can start with contrarian and then pivot to the chalk if you're in a really good spot. You can start with the chalk and pivot to the contrarian guys if you're behind the 8 ball. But when you look at this slate of games, the 3 late games are Denver, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Arizona, and Chicago, Green Bay. From just those 3 games, we have a very chalky RJ Harvey. We have a very chalky Puka Nacua and Michael Wilson's probably going to explode again in ownership. I think Jacoby Brissett will be brought along with him. We might see Trey McBride get to 15, 20. He came in higher than the industry expectations last week. I think he'll do the same this week. And then we have a lot of chalk in the Chicago game as well. We've got Josh Jacobs. We've got Luther Burden. We've got Colson Loveland could end up chalky. I don't think he will. But that might be one where like a lot of people think, oh, this is a really nice sneaky way to attack this game. And then, oops, he's 15, 20%. Obviously, we also have Christian Watson on the Green Bay side. We might have Dontavian Wicks chalk if Matthew Golden gets ruled out. And the problem here is, we talked about this before the show starts. Like, let's say you're on this chalk. Let's say you've got Michael Wilson in and Christian Watson and RJ Harvey. And you say, okay, I need to get different. Where are you going? Like there aren't that many contrarian options that you can go to because there's literally chalk on every single team. And beyond that, there's also a weird price thing where like most of this chalk is cheap chalk. You've got Puka, you've got Adams, you've got Trey McBride. So like there are some spend up options, but like let's say your thought is, okay, I need to get contrarian with my stack. So instead of going with Jordan Love and Christian Watson or Caleb Williams and Burden and Loveland, I'm going to go to Geno Smith. Okay, well, if you're going to the Geno Smith stack, it means you're leaving some extra money on the table now. And who are you using that on from these last 3 games? So it's just a really kind of unique setup where late swap is going to be hard to take advantage of, even though structurally, like you'd think, you've got 3 late games with a lot of chalk. There must be some really good late swap opportunities. I think it's one of the trickier kind of parts of this slate to figure out is I love the idea always of having these like late swap pairings figured out where ahead of time, if this happens, I'm going here. If this happens, I'm going here. But finding those ahead of time is going to be really, really tough this week.
Yeah, very interesting from that standpoint because the expense and what it can cost in some of these spots. And even and the opposite side of it is like, what if you start expensive? Like, oh, I've got this real. I mean, if you already have the Stafford, Nacua, Adams stack, let's just use something extremely random that's very expensive. I really don't know if you're behind, if it's even at the end of the day, it's like you just got to eat the fact that maybe you get them in cash because you have those guys. If everything failed in the morning, there's not really a purpose or a point at that side of it because it's like, yeah, I mean, there's something to be said if you could find a version of it that's slightly different or whatever, maybe. But to the end game, to your point, it's like you can't just move over to Jacobs and Luther Burden secondary stacks where it's like you land on the same thing as everybody else. So I think that's kind of interesting from that perspective. Brock Bowers maybe stays in check a little bit. Cortland Sutton, guys like that. If you could find like a secondary pairing to squeeze in, maybe that could do it. But if you're already on like that Rams Cardinals spot, it probably contains something of the line of Nacua and Wilson, and then whatever else you put in and around it. And that doesn't always alleviate you. If you don't have McBride because he was 8K, well, then there's no going to Brock Bowers if your tight end's already been used up, unless you want to see what you got in the flex there. So there's a lot of ways to think about it. Interestingly enough, Jacobs chalk just looks like it's going to stand regardless. And then there is still some like late love action that I'm hearing right now, but it seems like more like people will late swap to that versus right now. It's kind of like Jacobs, Watson, and Luther Burden. Once more news comes out, once late swaps happen, we could see all those numbers go up even further, I think is kind of the case. So where do you want to start here? I guess my take is I kind of want to start at the different than usual. Like I know we always go through like quarterback, this, that, and the other, but I really think the running backs are kind of shaping the slate. I know you talked about the Jacobs factor, but there is James Cook, there is Achane, there is the Breece Hall, the exterior guys like the Breece Halls, the Buckies, the Harveys, all of that. What sort of are you seeing besides that, and how are you viewing that position? Let's start at running back here.
Yeah, I like starting here. I think number one, where I'll actually start is just generally speaking, there's less kind of crazy chalk than usual on this slate. So we're going to have Michael Wilson as mega chalk. We've got him projected just under 40% in single entries. Could very easily clear that. Mm-hmm. But then there's a big drop off. So where it's not like one of those slates where we're kind of thinking about how to play the 3 mega chalk guys. There's only one on this slate. And then part of the reason why we don't have mega chalk at the running back position is because there are a bunch of really good options. And so I do think it's going to be pretty spread out. James Cook, Devon Achane, Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, RJ Harvey, and Kenneth Walker to me are kind of like their own tier. All should be pretty comfortably over 15%. We have Kenneth Walker as the lowest in that group at 18.3%. James Cook the highest at 28.3%. So I think you kind of alluded to it earlier. Like we're kind of choosing between 6 guys, and I think one kind of nice rule would be to only use one running back outside of this group, where you take your chance on a really contrarian guy, but then you kind of respect the fact that there is this group of running backs who all have a pretty good probability of success. And so you don't want to deviate from them too much, because again, it's that sort of concept where it's not just about being right about who we play. We also have to be right about who we don't play. And if you're deviating from this group with 2 contrarian running backs, you're really kind of pushing the envelope in terms of the bet that you're making of how well these guys don't do. And so I think that's kind of a really good place to start. So, that kind of means you maybe pick your favorite 2 from this group, pick your favorite from this group, and then use a wide receiver, a tight end, flex, anything like that. But yeah, I think it's a great place to kind of start with this slate, because it is worth noting, like, I think all of these guys are worth the ownership. They are high probability plays. It doesn't mean that we can't find some really good contrarian options as well, but we should definitely respect this group this week. It's not one of those situations where I feel like, hey, this guy's going to be 30% and he has no business being 30%. So we can really kind of start our lineup with how to leverage the spot.
Yeah, we'll note, like, just something to be said for, we talk about this all the time, whether people believe in it or not, but certainly it's a thing where whatever happened last week, people kind of like try and migrate to that. If it's a Sunday night football game and a 5-1 bust, it doesn't do well, the next night 5-1 is lower owned. If it's last week, it was like you stack 3 wide receivers with a cheap guy, and then you get the 2 stud running backs. That's sometimes what leaks into the following week. And so what's interesting to me about that, just pairing the 2 together now and kind of cross-referencing, because we've talked a ton about these running backs already, is that the quarterbacks that are showing like, let's do it this way, actually, because you got the ownership over there. I know you update it as the week goes on. What are you seeing for the sort of top 3 quarterback? Like, again, it spreads out. I get it's not super high owned on anybody, but are you seeing Josh Allen up there? Are you seeing Brissett, Tyrod Taylor? Like, what are you seeing for the ownership for smaller field?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure yet. This is one of the reasons why I'm very kind of unsure of where I'm going yet so far this week, because, last week kind of nailed the Jacoby Brissett steam. I can't even remember who the second and third highest quarterbacks were last week, but we were all over. We had one of our best ownership weeks of the last few years. It was a really, really good one. This week, I'm not anywhere near that point yet where I feel confident about, knowing where the field is going to go with quarterback. I have Jaden Daniels and Jacoby Brissett as the top 2. And I think the Daniels one is tougher, because on the one hand, McLaurin is a very easy stack partner. Debo has looked good enough. I think enough people can go to Ertz. But I don't know yet that people are going to feel confident in Daniels, actually, just from a health standpoint. And can he play well enough to really help that stack kind of take off this week? Brissett, I feel confident about. I think Brissett's going to be pretty chalky. We've got him at 12%. And I also feel fairly confident that Josh Allen is not going to be the 12 to 15% that he's being projected for around the industry in a lot of places, just because he's so hard to stack. Finding the right guys. Speaking as someone who used him last week and like literally 5 minutes into the game realized this is not going to work. Like, there's just no chance I have the right combination of pass catchers, because they weren't even on the field enough to be able to pick the right guys. I think people are going to be turned off from that a lot. Plus, people want James Cook more than anyone else, and Cook and Allen are very inversely correlated, as we've seen over the years. So beyond that, I think there's a chance for Trevor Lawrence team. I think there's a chance for Tyrod Taylor's team. I think both Jordan Love and Caleb Williams could end up brought higher than their expectations, just because people like those wide receivers. I don't think either of those guys are going to become like 15% or anything like that. But, if you look around the industry, you'll see somewhere between 3%, 5%, something like that for those guys. And it wouldn't surprise me to see 8 to 10 for either of them. But that's kind of it. So it's yet another week where no one's really separating from an ownership perspective at the quarterback position. And the overall like contrarian versus differentiation kind of level of your stack is much, much more about who are the wide receivers and tight ends in your stack and less about the actual quarterback himself.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's why I brought that up too, because I think that's one of the more interesting pieces of how this slate is shaking out. So you and I both like slates like this. When there's uncertainty or people are a little bit scared of this, that, or the other, it's because I was talking to somebody on a call yesterday about this. It's like when you had last week, all those stacks felt a bit gross. If you had Tyler Shuck stacks, if you had the Brissett stacks, if you had the Tyrod Taylor stacks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But What last week said to me was like, man, you're going to need the ceiling score from somewhere. The most likely ceiling score last week was coming from running back. There was ways to do sneaky things. Like last week, I call it the trifecta. But when you have Breece Hall chalk that seems extremely fragile last week, right? And you have Bijan across from him. The Tyrod stuff, by the way, Tyrod came in at like 4.8 in the Millie Maker. The other guys, yes, they were popular values, but they were like 10 and 11. It wasn't anything too crazy. And then Bijan broke the slate at a much lower ownership than the running backs in his range. You could play the Tyrod stack instead of Hall. You can play with it too, but just noting this. Then you could flip Hall over to Bijan, step 2. And then step 3, that was either already a pivot off of a popular Achane with Bijan $200 difference, or you could play them together. And that's my line. I had a lineup that came in 5th in the 153 max last week, and that's kind of how I started. After that, you just fill in the blanks. Again, as I always say, if that doesn't come through, it's not results oriented because that one did well. I mean, that's why we're talking about it. But it's saying that the reason I was very comfortable with that, because it's like an if this, then that. It could have been with the Tyler Shuck version of it with Vile and Olave. Could have been with a Brissett version with a couple wide receivers with Harrison Jr. last week and Wilson, and just see how that pans out. It doesn't mean they're all going to pan out for you, but it's like that's where the comfortability came from on what's a uncomfortable slate. So hopefully people know you can apply that same thought kind of to this week. Got to give this one a shout out. My man, little $10 donation. We appreciate that very much. Says, since finding the show, I've watched a ton of content, but this one hits different. It's given me the fuel and the confidence to think differently than the field. And that's really the hope of this, right? Is we're trying to really think through our thought process, give it out so that everybody can sort of get their stuff and put it together, take ideas from the chat and the engagement from all of you guys. So man, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Happy holidays to you and yours. Just going back to it though, these running backs you talked about, I wonder how often, based on those quarterback thoughts you had, do you think we see like a James Cook and Achane together, for example?
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit tougher this week because we definitely don't have the super cheap stack like Tyrod last week. And I was right there with you. I mean, my leverage lane last week was Josh Allen stacks. And then by Saturday night, I was totally off the Josh Allen stack onto a Tyrod double with Bijan as the bring back. And then I had both Achane and Waddle. So I wasn't going to take anything down because I had Waddle and Mechie in that lineup. But it would have been a really good week, and instead I had a terrible week. So it's kind of been that way for me over the last month. I'm really close to landing on the right thing and making the wrong decision, but eventually those 2v2s or the 1v1 works in your favor. So hopefully we get that this week. But yeah, I think there will definitely be people who try to kind of emulate the exact same style of lineup that won last week, where they try to go really cheap with the stack, which is why I think Caleb Williams and Jordan Love can really kind of come up, just because it's so easy to play through that game, to go Burden and Christian Watson. If you're playing both those guys, you're already hoping that game has explosive plays. Throw one of those quarterbacks in, add a tight end or something like that, right? So I do think that could end up more popular. And that would then kind of push people towards Cook and Achane. I think that will be by far the most popular of the like really expensive guys, but we could easily also see like people choose between Cook and Achane at the top, and then their second guy in is going to be one of the cheaper guys. So then, they've got Cook or Achane up top, and then they're going maybe Breece or Jacobs next, or they're going all the way down to Harvey and Walker. We could also that's another thing we could definitely see, where everyone has the same structure, and you're choosing between Achane and Cook up top. Then you're choosing between Hall and Jacobs in the mid-tier, and then you're choosing between Harvey and Walker as the cheap running back. And everyone just has different variations of those 6. So
that's why I started there too. Like I agree. Yeah. And we're strolling down leverage lane. Alex is running a few steps ahead of me. He's faster, slimmer, he's more in shape. So he's headed out on the road a little bit faster than me. But you got to something I really wanted to get to. And Justin had just posted in here. Now, we had this already this season. I believe it was those two, wasn't it? The infamous call of like, this one's going to get squeezed, this one's going to pop up. Mm-hmm. And you said something very key there, whether you knew it or not, of what I'm seeing is even if we get the Kincaid news, by the way, still no full practice on Friday. He looked pretty ginger. There's a video of him out there. You can go see it on X. And I don't know if he was even still wearing the brace. So if we see Knox pop up, yes, there's ways to get to Josh Allen. We are seeing ownership on him, etc. But I definitely think more people are just happy to click James Cook there for $1,000 less than Achane. And when they don't do that, what do you think they do? They say, if I'm not playing $8,800 Achane, why don't I just play Hall on the other side? And then they can figure out, because you nailed a key point, when do the other two most, if it's Harvey and Jacobs, they're in the afternoon. I can kind of just spin that around with whatever else I put in my lineup. So I am seeing a lot more thoughts and people talking about James Cook and Hall. Also, that is two of the home running backs, right, that you're playing. I know there's love for Adonai Mitchell still, and I get that. I think if someone has, I actually think it's pretty close. Like it has to be very close to the same money, right, for a 2v2. Whatever one's $100 more expensive. It's Achane and Mitchell versus Hall and Waddle. Has to be just like a natural 2v2. Any thoughts on that that combo pack? I mean, regardless of what the rest of your lineup looks like and kind of where you'd go with that or thinking around it?
Yeah, I definitely think you're onto something there. I think another way of just framing it is just saying so many people are going to look at that and say both of these running backs, Achane and Breece Hall, have good matchups. Both have a potential for a positive game script or game script that works in their favor, more so than they've typically gotten this year because neither of these teams are the greatest. And so the vast majority of lineups, maybe not the vast majority, but so many lineups are going to have at least one of these guys. And so I think it's worth at least considering the idea of playing both or playing neither instead of just choosing one, because both of those things, like they're two chalky running backs. Whether you choose to play them together or choose to fade both, that's just automatically going to kind of make you a little bit different than what most people are choosing to do.
I think so as well. And again, we do this every week on the Takedown Breakdown. Nades and I, my guy, we look up the Stack Seeker on the DB or the Fantasy Labs thing where you can go through and see it. And a lot of people have those secondary stacks. But then if you put I'm just picturing ahead of time, it's kind of what we do in the second segment. We'll get there soon. But just, when you put Achane and Hall together, how many people will run that? It's usually people picking between. And I think that secondary stack, again, we've talked about this plenty of times in the past. Well, it projects well. Therefore, it is going to end up something like that in the common build. It doesn't always it's already all priced in and cooked into to the setup. So it's not necessarily going to be a guarantee that makes each other work or whatever you want to look at from that perspective. So other thing I was thinking of too is you could also go with if you like those running backs, and this is jumping ahead again, but I think both those defenses could be interesting. We know both those quarterbacks capable of making mistakes. And if you want to slice into the ownership on Hall with the Jets D at 2,500, or you want to slice into the Achane ownership with the Dolphins, I think you could do that as well. That's just another spot that you could go there. Anything with this next conversation that you want to add on? Because I think part of the Achane conversation too, to me at least, would be that you do have, Puka Nacua, Adams, Jamar Chase. Like there is still some big boy receivers that are popping and they've got ownership attached to them in at least some way, shape, or form. It's just that's where people go when they go to higher priced wide receivers. So maybe we can move there next and just see what you're seeing with that and how that shakes out as it leans towards the common build, if at all.
Yeah, I think where I'll start there is it does seem to me like relative to particularly ceiling, Jackson Smith and Jigba is going to be the most unowned of all the studs. I'm hoping he gets to the point where he got a couple weeks ago where we were all over him. He was my leverage lane. He put up 40 plus. That'd be great if we could get that situation again. Right now, I've got him projected at 12.5% in single entries, but I do think there's probably going to be a meaningful difference in ownership between himself and then Puka, Chase, Achane. So there's definitely a chance there. And then, man, if you really wanted to kind of lean into that concept, you could potentially go both Smith and Jigba and Bijan Robinson and hope that game kind of takes off because of those two guys. And it's going to be hard to fit, but now you have kind of two of the contrarian guys because I've got Bijan at just 11% in single entries. And certainly that is going to be a low-owned combination, not just because they're both more contrarian among the studs, but also because they're really price prohibitive. So there's naturally going to be a bit of a unique combination. So that's a very kind of unique way to kind of attack this slate, but it's very intriguing because they without question are correlated with one another more so than a lot of running back wide receiver pairs. So yeah, I hadn't really given that much thought, but now that I mentioned it, I do kind of like that idea quite a bit.
Yeah, the tricky part is just the pricing that's associated with it. I mean, it's not that level because it's legit. Like you said, it makes perfect sense, but it's what else is available on the slate, the entire slate dynamics. And then from a perspective of thinking about like the Jonathan Taylor stuff these last couple of weeks, it's like, look, we get it. He's Jonathan Taylor. He could, and it just turns out he didn't have good weeks, but had he have had good weeks, it could have still been like 110, the bonus and a touchdown. And you're like, great, but still wasn't really needed, right? Still not really what's required for that. So, I mean, that's a very sneaky setup, like you said, but then what is the stack that goes around it? I loved your call pre-show that we talked about. I was like, people can go back to the well on Tyrod, Adonai Mitchell, Mechie, and then figure out who they want, whether it's Waddle, HM, both, Waller, whatever. But it's like the price bump on the other side is, what is it, like 2,300 or something already, or 2,500 almost on the Jets. So it's not as free as it was last week. And there's other ways that you can look at this slate. So I think that stands out to me as well.
Yeah, Tyrod's $600 more expensive than he was last week. Mitchell is $1,000 more expensive, and Mechie is $700 more expensive. So it's a totally different type of stack this week than it was last week. And also, like, Miami is still not a good defense. They've very much outperformed expectations. They've blown away my expectations for them. But one of the things is, like, they really, really have done a good job at preventing explosive pass plays. So when teams have succeeded against them, it's mostly been a success rate thing. It's 7-8 yards at a time. It's not the 40-yarder over the top that if you're playing Adonai Mitchell, like, that's what you're hoping for. So I still think that stack is in play. I still think Mitchell's in play. We saw Mitchell get volume last week. It wasn't just the explosive play, but I'm not anywhere near as intrigued by this stack as I was last week.
Right. And the other thing too, just of note for last week, a couple different things like on that game, I would say, because we're going to get there shortly anyway, but like the Mechie had plenty of opportunities. He actually dropped a touchdown. Like there was opportunity there. The other thing about HN, and if he does somehow end up getting squeezed because of 8,800, and even if it's just like kept in check and he comes in somehow at like 15% or something, that would be awesome to me, because that was a horrible game, to be honest, last week. He like had a catch for a touchdown that he couldn't get. He had two different opportunities in the red zone, very close to the end zone, things like that, and he still had 22.4. It reminds me of the week, what was it, a few weeks back when, man, there was somebody we were on that we were like, okay, they had a good week last week, but not a great week. And then the next week they came out and just smashed. It might've been Gibbs or something like that. And then it was like, okay, he didn't even have, that was like a floor game for him. And the next week comes out and just goes off. So
it was Gibbs. It was after the Minnesota game where he was kind of played off the field just because of the way Minnesota was blitzing. And then we said, okay, but that usage is not going to carry over into this next game. And sure enough, he went for 40 plus against Washington.
Yeah, love that. That was the week I was on him and somebody else for Leverage Lane. So I had a good one that week as well. Got to shout out my man Freddie B, says best show in the industry. Sam, what's up to me? We did have a great mastermind mentorship call yesterday. So good luck to you this week, man. Really love doing that stuff. So appreciate everybody in the mastermind project. If you guys want to check it out, you can go to shipitnation.com/mastermind. There's about 9 spots left. I sent the email out yesterday from the original 50 that I'd sent out before the one-time option closes off and changes at 50% off. So just looking at the other spot, tight end. I mean, I don't know if this is real, but I'm seeing some pretty high ownership on a couple of these guys. What are you seeing at the tight end position before we move to spending a little more time today on segment 2? Because I know there's a lot of different ways and game stacks and things like that you can go this week. People will love to hear our thoughts on all of that. What are you seeing though? Lastly, we'll do tight end and defense quick. Just what you see there.
Yeah, this is another really, really tough one. I don't see Pitts getting quite as high as some other sites have him, but I do think he's going to be pretty popular. There's definitely a narrative here that the one thing the Seattle defense allows is just like these short underneath throws, and so tight ends can really just kind of rack up the PPR points. I'm checking our DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data to see how tight ends. Yeah, and so tight ends are plus 3.7 fantasy points per game. Against Seattle. That's the 4th best tight end matchup, and every other position is a negative matchup going up against this Seahawks defense. So that's why we're seeing so much ownership there. But it's not one of those things where like I think it's a great spot for him. I think, and the other thing is the way that guys are scoring against Seattle. It's not big plays. It's not a bunch of touchdowns. It's just PPR points. So if you're telling me, okay, Pitts is going to get 13 or 14 instead of his, around 10-point average, whatever it is. Great. Like that doesn't scare me if I'm fading that. And I think there are some really intriguing tight ends this week. But there's also a chance that, the ownership projections around the industry are wrong. People recognize, I don't really want to play anyone who's relying on Kirk Cousins throwing to them against an elite Seattle defense. And maybe he comes in at 12% and now he becomes a good play. So I don't have an issue with Pitts. I think Warren could end up steaming and becoming really popular. We've got him at 14%, the second most popular. Like I said, I think Loveland could end up popular. We've got him at 9%, McBride at 8.5%. Both of those guys, to me, have serious steam potential, where if either of them came in at 20%, I wouldn't be shocked. But beyond that, I don't think anyone else has a chance to get that high. I think Bowers is probably the most intriguing of all to me, but then you can also just say, whatever stack I'm doing, whatever game I'm targeting, I'm just going to find my tight end from there. So Juwan Johnson, I'm interested in. I would be interested in Evan Engram too. The only problem there is we've seen a pretty consistent pattern so far this year from Denver, which is whenever they're playing an elite pass rusher, they kind of favor their blocking tight ends more so than Engram. And so against Max Crosby, I think we could see fewer routes run for Engram, so not totally interested there. But yeah, I think Bowers and Juwan Johnson are the two most likely guys that are going to end up in my lineup. But there are plenty of options this week, and I think it's just one of those things where even if you are using someone who could end up steaming and being 20%, that's fine. You just have to kind of approach your lineup with the knowledge in mind that, hey, my tight end might not be the contrarian guy that I think he is. Maybe you think he's still high probability enough to play him. Fine. Just make sure you have enough differentiation and separation elsewhere.
And anything quick at the defense. I do have extra thoughts there, but I'm going to save them for the second segment just in a minute here. But because for my own selfish reasons too, and just want to see it, and I'll be sharing them with everyone, so not completely selfish. But I have some curiosity, and I want to pick your brain on that. But for real quick, just while we're on it, just to wrap up segment number 1, and then we'll put together the common build. Just final thoughts. Move on to the second segment. What is the defense stuff that you're seeing right now? I think we saw Cleveland quite popular in places just because they're going up against Cam Ward. That's always a freebie spot to most. By the way, we did see last week Seattle D at ownership get there. I know people freak out about that stuff. It's like, obviously it was a good spot. You take what you get. You don't expect to get 30, but yeah, it's an undrafted free agent at quarterback that they're going to let throw the ball. So I know people go up in arms about it. You were allowed to play Seattle D. So good news. And many did. So just of note, it sucks sometimes when that kind of breaks the slate. I get it. You don't have that. You're like, well, if I don't have Seattle D, I'm dead. But that's kind of the point of anything we talk about with ownership. You're allowed to play whatever you want. You just have to figure it out elsewhere. And that was clearly a pretty good spot. I'm just not expecting 30. Anything you got on this week for defense?
Yeah, I just, in general, I've kind of felt this way since last season, and this season has kind of proven it more and more as we go along. But I think the average DFS player doesn't spend anywhere near enough time thinking about who they're playing at defense, because it is an extremely random position, no question, but where the spikes come from is not that random, because a lot of the time it's like maybe a defense gets to 9 or 11 because they got a fluke touchdown. That's really hard to predict, but 9 or 11 points, 12 points, that doesn't bury everyone who doesn't have them. The 24, 27, 30, those performances pretty much only come from aggressive, good defenses going up against a mistake-prone offense that is going to be in a game script where they have to throw the ball and they have to, take those risks and try to push the ball downfield. So I think it's worth just spending a little bit more time thinking about, okay, what are all of those potential spots this week? The Cleveland defense, the Denver defense, like those two are so far above everybody else in our defensive projections over at FTN. I think they deserve to be that far ahead of everybody else. And I really like both this week. I think the Browns are going to be very popular, even though they're 3,700. The Titans, to me, are the bad chalk, where they are the best of all of the really cheap options. But it's unlikely that the Cleveland offense is going to be in a game script where they have to push the ball downfield. So I think, Shedeur is going to continue to be able to play as risk-averse of a style as he's willing to play. They're going to be able to run the ball a lot. They're going to be able to throw to the tight ends, use play action, things of that nature. So to me, Tennessee is the bad chalk, where Cleveland and Denver, if Denver even gets there, are the good chalk. But probably another slate where I actually want to pay up this week.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Tennessee, sometimes it is like opposite side, and that happens a ton. That's just like running backs. We talk about this all the time where it's like, yes, the game flow could switch. The difference is this is Tennessee going into a very cold Cleveland. The dog pound, one of the most difficult places to play. So I'll just add this little tidbit on quickly, but it's not really even a tidbit. It's just my thoughts on it and a note is if Cleveland smashes like Seattle did this week, and you're going to complain about, oh, these chalk defenses just keep getting there. Myles Garrett doesn't give a shit about snow, cold, nothing. He's going for the record, and he gets to tee off on a guy that he can get 5 on this game. Yeah. So if they do that, if the ball comes loose, if whatever else happens, yes, they're going to be chalk, but there is 8 other positions in your lineup you can use to your advantage if that's where you so kindly want to land. And I'll say it in that way because this show is a single entry focus. So you are going to be deciding that as part of your lineup. If you can't get to them, if you like the lineup better without it. I always talk about people that are going through sort of their thoughts, right? They have options, they have thoughts, then they get to conviction, and conviction starts to build the lineup. Again, we're talking single entry, whether you do it a virtual hand build with the stone, the optimizer, the tools that you use, whatever it might be, whether you're just putting it in by hand, whatever, there is some conviction in there. What I see too often, though, is people leave their conviction instead of leaving stuff that's just kind of like fitting it. Like, if your conviction is Cleveland you have to have them this week, then don't change your defense. But typically, there's a bunch of other defenses. It's a highly variant position where you can make those moves around. If your conviction is that it's a Jamar Chase game, then don't just settle for Higgins. Yes, it's a similar spot. Yes, it could happen. But if it's your conviction, now if it's not, and you're like, well, it could be Higgins, I just kind of want to get a piece of that Bengals pass game. Well, then, yeah, you can move on that piece and you could say, I'll go Olave to Ville. I'll go Chase to Higgins, whatever you decide, and think about your roster as a whole. But don't move off your conviction. And if that's one of the spots you have high conviction, just figure it out and try to get different elsewhere. It's definitely a thing this week that could be real. I never even heard this before. I definitely asked you about this. We're going to get this one solved. My boy Alex is going to take care of me. He promised. But the Blick scored, I know about like the name and all that stuff, but I didn't know it was called the Blick score. That's a good name for your Discord.
I haven't named it that, but Cat Guy here, he loves calling it that, and he's awesome. I know you're kind of familiar with this as well, but you end up with certain subscribers who just they get it. They make the community infinitely better. And he's definitely one of them. And I should mention, by the way, I don't think I have taken down the promo code Turkey Day yet from Thanksgiving week. So if anyone wants to take advantage of the fact that I am not good at remembering to do those little things, you can still use Turkey Day for 20% off, and you can use that for a month or an entire year and just kind of really take advantage that way. So definitely go check that out. And it's been awesome. It's a lot of fun. And the community 100% has made me a better DFS player just from the way we all kind of talk through slates, and it's been a blast.
Yeah, man. And I think that's funny too, because not in on the Blick scored marketing side of things, but the Turkey Day code is still good to go. So our man Stat always in here. We appreciate you. So I love the conviction chat. Pick a lane, go 100 miles an hour. Yeah, I agree. We've talked about this a ton. You've helped out over at the Mastermind Project. We did another takedown breakdown recently for the Thanksgiving week, but it's not, like I said, that's like me tacking on to your point here, Stat. I love it, of going to 100 miles an hour. It's just like, I think what happens is people like try and switch lanes when they were already in the lane they wanted to be in. And so just taking the analogy one step further, it's like they do pick their lane and then they change out of the one thing. Like maybe if they want to slow down in their lane a little bit, that's okay, as long as they stay in their lane and then maybe make a slight move. But what happens is people go out of their lane and then wonder why they crash. You went outside the lines. That's what happened. So Strammy brings up a good point too. Washington versus giving Jay #9 or not hashtag, sorry, quote unquote 9. That's a good one too. I think that actually could pick up some steam as well at 2,800. We might actually see, to be honest, this is a kind of good segue into the second segment, is you could see, this is kind of interesting, Alex, a bunch of jumbled thoughts. You could see Tennessee defense come down to that side. And what I'm wondering is, if that's the case, I'm actually not sure many people are playing, or as some are saying, I don't think as many people can be playing Quinshon Judkins this week as we might think. And it's actually a pretty good spot, a pretty good matchup. It could just be also too, some of those Garrett sacks lead to like a fumble, turnover, whatever. And it's just, they're sitting there at the 6-yard line. It's like, all right, Judkins will just run this 3 times and one of them will go in, if not the first one, because he's very shifty. So I think that's interesting too, is Judkins Where do you have him right now? Just, now that we're into the sort of second segment, different ways to play it and whatnot, that kind of stands out to me. I've got him somewhere in the 12 to 15 range.
I thought where you were taking that was that the Washington defense is going to be a popular pivot off of Tennessee, in which case I very much agree, and I think they'll end up around 15% or so as well. Let's see. I have got Junkins just under 10% at 9.8%, which I think is probably pretty solid. He's one of those where, like, if he were a pivot off of the Harvey and Walker price group instead of the Brees and Jacobs price group, I think he'd be popular. I think he'd be one of those guys, kind of even with those guys in ownership. But because he's an extra 800, 700, whatever, I don't think he's going to steam much beyond this at all.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to know. So any final thoughts on sort of wrapping up what you're seeing as the common build? I think a lot of it, to me at least, stems from the running back position. Like I mentioned, I think secondary stacks become very common, where it's like, if you see a Walker, Kyle Pitts could pick up more steam than you might think right now. We talked about how you can literally flip Achane and Mitchell or Mechie to Hall and Waddle. You're seeing stuff like that. You're seeing some of the other guys that we talked about in the afternoon, clearly the Jacobs burden. So I think we see a lot more like secondary, cap it off with a quarterback that stacks with somebody and throw in one of those popular defenses. Do you have anything you want to add when it comes to that? But that kind of, it's how I see it right now, at least anyway.
Yeah, I just, the only thing I'll add is I just see a lot of, trying to save money with pass catchers. And we've seen this kind of build a lot this season. Doesn't mean that people aren't going to be able to pay out for Puka or Chase or JSN in places. But I think overall, people are trying to save money with these cheaper pass catchers, particularly this week, because there are some pass catchers who offer some real upside. We've seen Michael Wilson show real upside. We know that both Luther Burden and Christian Watson have a ton of big play upside. So it's just, particularly when you're chasing that 200 fantasy point day, that 220, 230, it really lends itself to this structure. You're getting 20 plus point performances from cheap wide receivers. And now you're getting the running back who goes for 150 and 2 scores. It makes sense. But if we get a really low scoring slate, it also, it actually kind of raises the likelihood that we get the low scoring slate, because these are boom or bust cheap wide receivers. And there is the potential that, Watson was failing last week and would have failed if not for the one bomb touchdown. If you take that one play off the board, he fails. There's obviously there's a chance that Burden does the same sort of thing, finishes with 3 receptions for 40 yards or something like that. And so it's just one of those where I think it's very hard to come up with like the best answer immediately of, okay, if I'm pivoting off of this type of build, how am I doing it? What am I going to? But I just think like the glaring thing to me is that it's once again a very predictable type of lineup that people are building. They're trying to find the cheap upside through the pass catchers to pair with the really high probability running backs. And that's not going to work every single week this season, even though it has hit at a very high rate so far this year.
Yeah, we'll segue into the second segment, which is sort of how to leverage the common build. I have an immediate thought right out of the gates. Like I said, I'll pick Alex's brain on some other stuff. I'm pretty certain on where my leverage lane will be already, and we'll see how that ends up shaking out, just because there's one game in particular I have a little liking towards, but there's, other lineups as well. I don't know, Stat, like this is another one. I think it's the opposite. I think there's so much certainty of people being, again, doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I'm saying people think it's like Cook, Achane, Jacobs, Hall, and then your tertiary options of like Harvey, Walker, Bucky, like it's fine. I think it's actually that is what's forcing it. And I think that's perfect segue, and why I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, I think just real quick, I think you're both correct. Right, where you're saying it's because people like the certainty of the expensive or at least mid-tier running backs. But I think Stat's also correct in saying like the value running backs don't offer certainty at all.
Right.
The closest you can get to certainty with the value running backs is this RJ Harvey, Ken Walker type of range. But that's a rookie running back who hasn't been that effective with his opportunities so far. Got there with touchdowns last week. Ken Walker, who especially in these potential blowout scripts keeps getting vultured over and over and over again by Charbonnet. Like the only time he's really had control over the backfield touches is when they've been in highly competitive games. this probably won't be that competitive a game. So there's really no certainty there. And then anywhere below that, like when you get into the price ranges where you're finding the Luther Burdens, Christian Watson at 5,200, there are just no options from the running back position. So I think you both are correct where there's.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. You just missed the word value because it's like, yes, there's less certainty when you get to the Harveys, the Walkers, etc. The people are very comfortable with those first four of Cook, HN, Hall, and who's the Jacobs. Those four, like those are clear-cut names. A lot of 3 of the 4 at home, great matchups on paper, all this stuff that you're seeing. So I think that's where it's very clear-cut. After that, it's also because of the value on the slate. Again, as people probably know, as definitely Stat knows, but for many others, but when you have Adonai Mitchell still only at 4,600, I know it's a price boost from last week, but you have Michael Wilson at 5,600, missing it, Dortch and Harrison Jr. You got Luther Burden with no Rome Odunze. Like that's just going to build that lineup. So that's what I was going to hit earlier. The immediate segment for me, or segue for me going into segment number 2, Alex, and how to leverage the common build is to play some of those uncertain spots and at the running backs, or figure out your build and maybe play 2 running backs and then use some of these guys. Like you could still use a Michael Wilson in a 4 wide receiver build, especially if you get to like a more balanced. What if instead of Bucky Irving, you play Agbuka or Godwin? What if instead of the HN stuff, you do play Waddle? What if instead of Warren at tight end, you play Michael Pittman or something like that? That you do, like you can definitely get to a more mid-range build, but you could also use some of the cheaper values lower than Luther Burden and Christian Watson and Michael Wilson and Adonai Mitchell. And in the guys I'm talking about are like the Viles, who will still get a little bit of love, the Pat Bryants of the world instead of the RJ Harveys, the whatever you want to do on Arizona. I mean, if you want to play Weaver or something like that, like I think again, that can just make it all work. But imagine a Weaver spot where you end up with McBride and Puka. And that's different than like your JSN and Bijan spending similar money, but doing it in a way that's going to fit the rest of the stack. And then, yeah, you are taking a risk on Weaver, but there is no Dortch. There is no Harrison Jr. Could it be the Ducala guy or whatever? Like it could be anybody. I'm just giving examples, but I certainly think playing the more expensive wide receivers and tight ends and just flipping the build on another reason. I'm going to keep this tangent going is that's also a very nice indoor game on a slate that has like 6 weather spots that you could just try and figure it out and skip over all the other stuff. So I just think little things like that kind of stand out to me. Is there anything you got right out of the gates, kind of like my thought there, that you want to add to it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, like the first thought that I have in terms of how to leverage this common build is just the idea, and this is similar to what you were saying, just the concept of, okay, well, what if one game really elevates and one game carries an entire offense to successful performances? And I think there are options kind of around the slate. Denver comes to mind, Tampa comes to mind, Cincinnati comes to mind, where you're just kind of hoping that like none of the other games kind of really elevate to the level that we've seen certain games elevate. Like it's worth kind of its own conversation, and we'll probably go into this momentarily, but the Arizona stuff has been so interesting over the last 4 or so weeks, because on the one hand, you can look at Jacoby Brissett's game logs. You can look at, McBride's game logs or Michael Wilson's game logs, and you see this like very consistent, constant production. But when you then look into, okay, well, how did those games actually go? What were the, ways in which these guys put up these numbers? It's mostly been the same story, which is the offense is ineffective for a quarter and a half. They end up way behind, and now they end up throwing the ball 44, 57, 49, and 40 attempts for Brissett in the last 4 games. That's insanity. And so much of the production has come when they're already down 28-0 against Seattle. They were down 28-0 like in a quarter and a half. They were already down big time against San Francisco when they started to really produce. And so if you present a very different game environment to a lot of these kind of chalky games where the game environment just doesn't lend itself to a lot of fantasy scoring, I do think we could end up with a low-scoring slate. And so if you find the one game environment that does elevate everything, whether it's Cincinnati, Buffalo, or Denver, or Tampa, you can really, really just kind of find yourself in business. We saw it a little bit last week with the Jets, where it's not like they scored 1 million points, but throughout the fourth quarter, the Jets were in the mode of, we have to push the ball. We have to get points quickly. And, Tyrod went from really not doing a whole lot to the quarterback you needed very quickly. And that also took Adonai Mitchell from solid value. He's helping you to, oh my God, you really had to have this guy to win the slate. So just find that one game environment that takes everything across that line from decent play to great play. And I think you can really kind of separate on this slate.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And just to stack onto it, if you will, is what we said when you're talking about leveraging the common build. And my at least 2 cents was of the secondary stacks. It's like the Burden with the Jacobs, the Adonai Mitchell with the Achane stuff, like anything you have like that you're seeing. When you see that, it's funny because it actually worked last week, but because it got a little bit more expensive, I think the double and the triple stacks will be less, not doubles because they're always popular, but I think like a triple stack, for example, and I'll just rattle off a few: Love, Watson, Dobbs, and either Luther Burden on the other side, no Jacobs, or you go to even like Wicks and something else and build it, and Loveland and do something like that. Like, I don't think a ton of people go to that. We talked already about something like a Brissett, Wilson, Weaver, McBride, Puka, like anything like that just takes over. Will some of those force you into playing what people are calling the uncertain running backs? Yes, but that could be the game changer that you need to have for the slate. So little things like that matter. Going back to the well on Tyrod Taylor with Adonai Mitchell, Mechie, Waddle, you're using up all 3 wide receiver spots, and you don't have Christian Watson in there. You don't have Luther Burden in there. You don't have Michael Wilson in there. Yeah, you're leaving out some dudes, but what if they just get their mediocre scores? Trevor Lawrence situation this week. There is no Washington. You've got Myers, Brian Thomas Jr., Brenton Strange. The other side, you've got options for sure. You could go double tight end with Warren if you do like him, like others seem to. You could go Pierce. You could go Pittman. There's alternatives there. And then you go back up to even where was the other spot I was going to look at? I think somebody talked about this already. Oh, the Tampa Bay Bucks game. Like someone mentioned in the chat, but if you have either side of that game, I'm not sure which one would be the most interesting, but either side of that game definitely has options. The Bucks did not. They opened up the window on Mike Evans and Jalen McMillan, but they're not ready to come back, so they're not going to be playing this week. So you got Ibuka, Godwin, Otten. On the other side, we'll wait on the Olave news, but you got Olave, Vile, Jawan Johnson. I think either sides of that game are stackable. And then lastly, and I'll kick it back to you, is the Burrow one. Burrow, Chase, Higgins. And by the way, like I said, what if we get the news? One of the best spots going up against for tight ends all season has been going against the Bengals. What if you go Burrow, Chase, Higgins, and run it back with Knox, assuming Kincaid doesn't play, or put Shakir in there and use up he's $300 less than Michael Wilson. One, you could still play Michael Wilson in the flex and play 4 wide receivers. 2, you could say Michael Wilson gets 15 and Shakir gets 25 and makes the other side go. By the way, I'll kick it to you on this note because I think you kind of like Burrow this week, but Burrow, tons of dropbacks in a competitive game, right? Until it wasn't. Unfortunately, my Ravens can't find a way to do much of anything in certain weeks against certain opponents, but the conference battle did not go well for them. But yeah, Burrow could just drop back a ton of times. It's going to be the first time since I think week 2 that he gets Chase, and Higgins all back together. And then on the Bills side with some injuries and stuff like that, just depends on how it plays out with the Kincaid news. If everyone's on Cook, you could fit him in there as well. But what's your thoughts on some of those game stacks and just different things that we talk about in segment 2?
Burrow was my very first thought of how to play this slate, particularly once we got Higgins back. It's just a perfect storm where, like, imagine last year getting to play Burrow at 6,500 with 82 Chase and 62 Higgins. We just didn't get that, right? Like, Burrow was consistently in the 7s. Chase was 9+, and Higgins was still at 7, stuff like that. So yeah. I mean, this is as cheap as we're going to get to play these guys. It's actually very similar to where I'm pretty sure I'm going to go for my leverage lane, but it's just an offense that is the healthiest it's been all season in a game environment where we could actually see them pushed by Buffalo, where they could have to be hyper aggressive and get 46, pass attempts again from Burrow, something like that. So yeah, it's a really intriguing way to play the slate. The most obvious to me is Burrow, Chase, Higgins, James Cook. But obviously, if you use that group of 4, you're going to have to find a lot of savings elsewhere. So I don't know how viable that actually is. That's something I'm going to test in the Sims a lot over the next day and a half, whatever. But yeah, it's just a really, really, really good spot. It's like it's almost a perfect spot from just a DFS theory perspective, because you'd be ahead of the curve on the offense, but you're getting the offense cheaper than they usually are. You're getting a game environment that really pushes them. And it's not just that one guy is contrarian. It's not just that Burrow is contrarian. Like, all of these guys are contrarian. Chase will be popular, but nowhere near as popular as he would have been last year in this game, or this game environment at this price tag, things of that nature. So across the board, they are under-owned, and they're also underpriced. That's usually a winning combination. It's just a really hard thing to actually pull off, to go with this entire stack and then still feel like the rest of your lineup is strong.
Yeah, the chat's starting to get to my leverage lane too, so we'll get there shortly. We're at the 55-minute mark, probably not too much else to go through. You guys can put some questions in the chat as well. I saw one here, like, what are your thoughts on the Bills D then? Clearly, not as interested if you are playing the Cincy side, but the fact that he drops back that much, maybe it could work out. I would think that would be a unique way to cut into the James Cook ownership. I do not think the James Cook ownership is going away, but I don't think you're going up against too much, because I don't see Burrow. I don't even see Jamar Chase being as popular as a lot of places have him right now, once everything actually shakes out, due to all the points we brought up throughout the show. But I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't like the thought. Like, what are the chances that a defense that isn't that good to begin with, doesn't produce a ton of fantasy points, gets more production against Joe Burrow than elite defenses get against Geno Smith or Cam Ward or Jacoby Brissett or Kirk Cousins? Like, if you're paying anywhere near $3,400, you should just find a way to get up to one of those really expensive defenses.
Yeah, I like that call. Like I said, I get it. And the large field stuff too, I see where people are like, I'm going to have a mix of everything. And like, some of those builds will make sense. And if you see it, I'm fine leaving it as a way to slice into the ownership. If you're not on any Bengals, whatever, that's sometimes how you get a little bit lucky in that case on a highly variant position. But just noting, to Alex's point, especially when we're talking a single entry GPP focus, there is a lot of options that you can just hammer it with and take your, maybe they somehow beat them. And there's like but they got 18 and your defense only got 17. Well, I got 17 and it had a very high likelihood of that, X versus the other spot took this to get it. So anyway, anything can happen at any time. I don't hate the thought, but definitely some other options there. Just trying to see if there was anything else that we missed of. One interesting note, I guess the last one I'll sort of leave it with here is on the Packers side of things, especially because I don't think the Jacobs ownership is going to go away either. I even think like that would be where, you could see even more people late swap to it, maybe some swap off of it because he is too popular, but I actually think it's the setup where you could see more people get to it than you think going in pre-slate. So it becomes popular, then less people late swap anyway. But my thoughts are Wicks, who's cleared to go now, and the fact that Golden still could be out and probably is. Wicks is $100 more than Luther Burden. Again, you can play them both together, but very interesting in that game if you ended up going with like a Love. Watson's popular, and I think for good reason. So you go Love, Watson, Wicks, and then instead of Burden, use DJ Moore, or instead of Burden, use Zacchaeus or something like that. Do you have any thoughts? I got two spots I want to ask about. This is one of them. Any thoughts on the other Packers guys like Wicks? And then any thoughts on the alternative Chicago options if going that route? By the way, we know it's cold in Lambeau, but Chicago quite capable of playing in the cold. So I don't think anyone's too worried about that game. It's not going to be like the coldest or anything. It's just what both these teams are used to.
I'm glad you're asking about this game, because I mentioned to you ahead of time that like I had some fun Packer stats for you, and I almost forgot. So appreciate you asking this.
Perfect.
First, Jordan Love has been one of the absolute best quarterbacks in the league by DVOA when he's not pressured. And Chicago is one of the worst teams at creating pressure. So this is a really good spot for Love to just be successful in any regard. Then you get to the actual receivers, and there's been a really kind of clear pattern with Chicago. Now, they already play a lot of man defense, but if you think back to the start of the season, they came out one of the man heaviest defenses in the league. They finally got Jalen Johnson back last week. And even against Philadelphia, a team that most defenses have decided to kind of zone up against because AJ and Devontae are so good against man coverage, they played 62% man coverage. To be clear, like their 39% man rate, as charted by FTN data, has already been one of the highest of the year, and they played 62% man last week. So I think we're going to see a ton of zone here from Chicago against Green Bay, which really, really, really lends itself to Dontavian Wicks above all else. If there's no Matthew Golden, I think Dontavian Wicks is a phenomenal play. But Christian Watson's also been really good against man. Dobbs has been a lot better against zone this year, but he actually has a history last year of being quite effective against man. So I think just the fact that they're playing man or facing man just kind of helps most of these guys. But Wicks, to me, is the one who just so clearly benefits immensely. He's probably their best route runner, probably their best man beater, might even be like just their best receiver, period. They just don't seem to give him the opportunity that the other guys have. I think he's their most complete receiver, where like all their other guys, even Jaden Reed included, they kind of have a very clear-cut role in the offense. Watson's the deep guy. Dobbs is, the underneath possession type receiver. Reed is the gadget kind of big play guy. Wicks does everything well. He's just not a specialist in any one category, so they don't seem to give him the respect that he deserves. But if he's once again thrust into a very clear full-time role because of no Matthew Golden, he's the guy I want because he benefits immensely from the type of coverages he's going to face this week.
I think that Romeo Dobbs gets like extra targets, the guardian cap treatment. They just see that big helmet and they're like, oh, it's easy to spot. So they just end up throwing the ball there when they're out there. But what about on the Chicago side? I mean, you mentioned his name a little bit earlier. I can go pull it up, and I'm sure you have it there, maybe even know it off the top of the dome. But the Bears, or sorry, the Packers versus the tight end. Like, is what's bringing people to Loveland? Is it like the setup? Again, not like he's going to be super popular. I'm just saying in that spot, one thing I always like to think about is, okay, what if I don't go to Luther Burden? Who sort of would it be? Or do you just think it's better to stick with Burden? And then what's thoughts on Loveland quick?
Early in the season, Green Bay was popping as one of the best matchups for tight ends. They were up at something like +4 fantasy points per game in our DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data. They're now at -0.2, which means over the last, let's say, 4, 5, 6 weeks, they've been really quite good against tight ends. So if the matchup is driving the Loveland love, no pun intended there, I think it's a little bit misguided because people just don't realize how improved Green Bay has been in that regard. But I think there's just a reasonable argument for the fact that Loveland is really good, and the more they use him, the more they throw to him, it's been effective. And so when you take away one of the premier pass catchers in the offense, the wide receiver one in Rome Odunze, it's just very natural to say, okay, well, why don't we throw more to one of the guys who's already been having success? So I think just from that point of view, there's merit to Loveland at $3,200. But to me, it's not about the matchup. It's just about the increased opportunity and the fact that he's already earning increased opportunity through his production.
Very interesting note, actually. This is funny. So what did Newen say here? Because I was looking it up as you were talking and I heard all of it, but I just want to say, like, that's a good stat pull because I want to see this. Says we care about this week, but I will note that we are historically horrible against sides. That could be why. But this is the thing. That's why you got to dig into this stuff and why this data is so interesting. Do you know who they played? And I don't remember them all already, but they played like the Panthers, Detroit with no Laporta, Hawkinson, who's been an absolute shell of himself with no quarterback to throw to him. The last time they faced a real tight end was Trey McBride, and he dropped 10 for 74 and 2 on them. They haven't faced a tight end. I don't care what anybody says. I'm calling this kid a real tight end. Colston Loveland, this guy is a solid producer. There is no Rome Odunze. The chalk will be on Burden. I think it's really interesting. This is not my leverage lane, but I'm definitely thinking about this for some of the thoughts out there is like Love, Watson, Wicks, Loveland. Double love, baby. Love is in the air. You get Jordan Love, Colston Loveland, and then you fill it out with Chalk Watson, Christian Chalkson, and Dontavian Wicks, who looked incredible on Thanksgiving. It has nothing to do with that. That's just more of a time to shine. Sometimes when guys get the opportunity, we know what this guy was capable of. We liked him on Thanksgiving, assuming the news was going to come out the way it did. So we'll wait and see if Golden is out again. But I think it's a great call from you. And then I think just adding little tidbits like that in, that's what this is all about, trying to figure it out. 32 instead of $3,800 wide receiver chalk that kind of goes with a Jacobs call. You can get a different running back than Jacobs. Instead of Burden, use Wicks. And instead of burden, use Loveland and use up the tight end position that way. And like we said, now you can still fit your Michael Wilsons. You can still fit your good running backs. You can do whatever you want. So I kind of like that. And it's not even my leverage lane. Do you have anything else on that you want to add? If not, I got one more spot I want to ask you about.
It's a really good point on who Green Bay has played, because even though I'm citing a stat, DVOA adjusted fantasy points against data, that knows that and that accounts for the tight end's typical production, it's still a different beast, if you will, because they haven't faced tight ends lately that are a key part of the offensive game plan, like Loveland could be, maybe even should be in this one, and that McBride was when they played against him. So it's a really good point, and it's one of those things that, like, this is true kind of all football data, because football is so hard to kind of capture statistically. It's like every single stat is going to be incomplete in some way, and so our job when looking at football data is to say, okay, what is this stat missing? What can we add? What kind of context can we add to it? And directionally, what does that help tell us? And so it's a really good point about who they played. I think Loveland is a good play. It's also, though, why I think Loveland could end up being 20%, 25%, because anyone who starts to think about $3,200 Colston Loveland with no Roma Dunze, no one is going to like put their mind and focus on this and come away with the idea that, nope, he's a bad play. Everyone who thinks about it is going to realize there's merit to the play, and so he could end up really popular.
Gosh, I'm just going to okay, I'll ask you while I'm doing this because I want to my own curiosity is getting me, but I want to ask you one last spot, and then we'll go to our leverage lane. If you guys have more questions, you can throw them in. The last one I wanted to ask you about was the Indy side of that game. I guess one of my thoughts is, again, it's not mine, but just another quick thought is the fact that, like, even like last week with the Jag stack, he was just throwing to everybody, man. Like, it's just, he just keys in. Talk about stack certainty. And now you get Parker Washington out of the mix. It's like, it's Myers. I don't care what people want to say about BTJ. It's still, you got to include him in the stock conversation. And it's Brenton Strange. Like, that's the three guys. You can put all three of them. You can put two of them. You can pick one of them, whatever you want to do. He kind of just throws to that side. But if I'm interested in Strange to go with them, or like maybe it is a couple of the receivers and Warren on the Indy side, if I was to say I'm not as in on Jonathan Taylor again, which I'm not, out of Pittman, Pierce, Warren, do you got anything on those three guys?
Yeah, I'd use all three if I was going to Daniel Jones. We kind of had a 2, maybe even 3 week period where we talked about Daniel Jones triples every single week. Yes. I'm less interested in it now, just because I think Daniel Jones is really quite hurt, and that it very much affects him. It's not just that he's not going to run. He already wasn't running a ton. It's just that, like, he's not as capable in the pocket of the movement he needs to let the deep routes develop, things of that nature. But this is still a very well-designed offense. It's still an offense that is capable of producing in a big way. And the matchup with Jacksonville is pretty good from the standpoint that Jacksonville is a bit of a pass funnel, and they've allowed some really big games to wide receiver ones and tight ends kind of throughout the season. As I kind of just evaluate the game environment as a whole, the play volume should be quite good in this game. I think the play volume favors the Jacksonville side to the Indianapolis side, but obviously that can flip-flop. What I'm most confident in is that this game will have a lot of plays. Both of these offenses are pretty up-tempo. They like to throw the ball. So I think this is a very good game environment. On the Jacksonville side, I have conviction in saying it's not that I think Brian Thomas Jr. will do well or will have his best game of the season, but his ownership compared to the Strange ownership and the Myers ownership just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. BTJ should be more popular because he's still the one who's most likely to go for 30 or 35 DraftKings points. So I'd be very confident playing that side if you want the Trevor Lawrence side of things. If you're just asking me, like, if only one of these Colts pass catchers does well, who's it most likely to be?
Yeah,
I don't have a great answer for you. Because I think part of the beauty of the offense is that it is unpredictable in the way they design these pass plays, and it's like a lot of the play calls and the scheme is designed to get somebody open because you didn't think that's where they wanted to go on that play. And that makes it really hard to predict from just a structural standpoint of who does well against this type of defense that Jacksonville plays. I think Pierce, maybe Pittman, but honestly, like it's a good spot for all three, which is more or less why I'm taking the position of, I think if I'm playing anyone from that offense, I'm just going to say, okay, Daniel Jones isn't that affected by his injury. The Indianapolis offense does have a lot of success, and they lean into the fact that Jacksonville's past funnel, and it's finally just that game where the triple stack really comes through. And if you're using that, if you're going with the triple stack, you're not saying all three of these players are going to be optimal. You're saying, I think two have a good chance of being optimal. The other one's going to do fine. And if I use all three, now I dramatically increase my likelihood of having the correct two. And I'll just take the third no matter what he gives me. So
that's why I was asking you that, because sorry to cut you off. That's why I was asking you that, because you literally walked into what I was about to say is I feel very good about everything you just said for the Trevor Lawrence side. Like, I like Lawrence, I like Myers, I like BTJ. I like the fact that they're all sort of in the price range of Michael Wilson, etc. And you can still put him in there if you want. I'm just saying, like, and then even Strange, because you got 54, 57, 59, and 3,900. It's a terrible pass defense. It's all got better, whatever. I believe, isn't Sauce out now too? Yeah. So, like, I know they got Ward back and they were like, oh, we got Ward and Sauce, but he's out. They love to pass the ball. Last week, he was whipping it around to something close. I think he was close last week. And so to me, that just looks like a better spot. It doesn't look like there's going to be we have to do, it says like a weather check pregame, but I don't see too much there for that. They like to pass the ball a ton as it is. So try to figure out if it's just like Myers, BTJ, and then go with Warren. What is the tight end DVOA for these two teams? Like, is Strange in the better matchup from what you've seen, or is Warren in it?
So Indianapolis has been a great matchup for tight ends, a great matchup for wide receiver twos, a great matchup for wide receiver threes, a really bad matchup for wide receiver ones. And remember, that predates Sauce. So this isn't an instance where Sauce is out, we can just throw that out the window. It's also really interesting because, you know, initially Charvarius Ward might have been able to explain that, but then Charvarius Ward missed a few weeks and they still were good against wide receiver ones and not against the others. So you have that from Indianapolis, and then Jacksonville has been a really good matchup for, I just lost it. Jacksonville, great matchup for tight ends, great matchup for wide receiver ones, and then no one else has really produced because the story with the Jacksonville defense is more or less like they just allow production to wherever the offense wants to throw the ball. So
pretty interesting.
Both of these defenses present very good opportunity for offensive production.
That's what I like. And it feels a little bit sneaky from that sense. We'll see if the ownership shakes out that way or stands, but currently looks like it is. By the way, pretty decent total. Like, I'm seeing like a 48.5 and something like things like it's a bigger number than I expected. And also the good news for the wide receiver one thing on the Jag side is Parker Washington is their wide receiver one, jokingly, but he's out. And so maybe, Brian Thomas is like a 3 now. We can just take him and call it a day, right? Is that how it works?
I not jokingly was going to make this point that I don't know who we should consider the wide receiver one. And to be clear, like the way that we define wide receiver one when we're doing all these numbers is it's how the defense approaches the offense. And so, for example, like we have Devontae Adams as the wide receiver one, not because we think that he's the better wide receiver on the team or that, the Rams offense doesn't want to get Puka the ball more than they want to get Adams the ball, but defensively, Adams gets the quote-unquote wide receiver one treatment just because it's impossible to defend Puka the way you defend most wide receiver ones. Like we saw Puka, I forget exactly what the football terminology is called, but Puka came in motion the other day and ran a route through the gap between the tight end who was blocking an edge rusher and the tackle who was blocking an interior pass rusher. He ran a route through that and then turned towards the middle of the field. Like, you can't just have a cornerback shadow that type of route. So that's how we do these wide receiver one, wide receiver two assignments. And I don't know who Indianapolis views as who's the wide receiver one that we need to take away, because they're very clearly putting an emphasis on taking away the primary option in the opposing passing game. I think that it's probably Jacoby Myers at this point, but I don't know. I don't know how they view it. If you're just looking at production of late, Parker Washington, Jacoby Myers, those have been the guys who are consistently, converting on third downs and even making splash plays. Brian Thomas Jr. has kind of been invisible, but to me, that means I want to go there because I know that when Brian Thomas Jr. finally hits in a game, it's coming because of a 60-yard touchdown. And in that one play, you're going to know, okay, he's the guy I wanted in this game. And then also just like from a pure correlation standpoint, because we're clearly talking about, potentially stacking this game in some way, the game as a whole gets sped up when there's a 60-yard touchdown, and that's most likely to be Brian Thomas Jr. So I think whether I'm on the Jacksonville side or the Indianapolis side, if I'm on this game at all, I think BTJ is the guy I'd like to play it through on the Jacksonville side.
Yeah, I will say too, the one thing that'll definitely be invisible is the ownership on that spot, because it's not going to be very much. So, all right. I think that's good, man. We had some fun doing this. I know some people talked about it in the chat. I'm actually switching my leverage lane. So I said the show is good. I had one coming in, the chat got it, but I'm going to move off it. I'll use that somewhere else. I'll have my slate plan up over at Ship It Nation. People could check out the other quarterbacks and whatnot that I'm on. I'm definitely not going to go away. I gave away tons of thoughts today, what I'm thinking, but what is your leverage lane for the week? You hinted a little bit earlier what it could be, but what are you going to finish it with here and roll with officially?
Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to play this just yet, but my leverage lane is going to be the Tampa Bay offense in some way. And I mentioned earlier that the Tampa Bay offense and the Cincinnati offense are very similar in my mind this week. And the main reason for that is think about how expensive this Tampa Bay offense has been over the last few years and how incredibly productive they've been week after week after week. And now they're finally healthy. Godwin looked really good last week. Baker Mayfield even said something along the lines of Godwin looked better this week than he did coming back like at the start of the season. So remember at the start of the season, he's coming back off a major injury. And Baker essentially was saying like he never really looked like himself. But now after this second injury that he had to recover from, he looks like himself. He looks explosive again. He only ran 20 routes last week. And before you start to think, okay, well, if he's going to be on such a route limit, no, the problem wasn't that he was on a big limit. The problem was they just didn't have enough offensive play volume as a whole. There were only 29 routes run by Ibuka, who led the team. So I think what we could see is a much more effective Tampa Bay offense than what we've seen all season. And against New Orleans, who, their offense probably isn't likely to have these long drives or anything like that. So we could see both a boost in efficiency and play volume. And all of a sudden, this Tampa Bay offense is just producing massive fantasy point performances from really underpriced guys. $5,800 for Baker Mayfield, $7,000 for Bucky Irving. Ibuka's down to 63. This is as cheap as Ibuka has been in a long, long time. In fact, it's the cheapest he's been since week 3 against the Jets. And we also have Chris Godwin at $5,300, who looked quite good last week. This is a very zone-heavy defense that we see in New Orleans. Godwin has always been a great zone beater. So my leverage lane specifically, I think, is going to be the combination of Bucky Irving plus Chris Godwin. But I'm also going to look into triple stacks where I add Ibuka and Baker Mayfield. I'm going to look into New Orleans stacks where I have, these two guys as a bring back. But this game environment as a whole, I really like. But especially the combination of Bucky Irving and Chris Godwin, I think they're especially positively correlated because think about what they do, right? Godwin converts third downs, gives Bucky a better chance to score. Bucky has some explosives, but then he could lead to a Godwin touchdown. And basically it's just like when these guys succeed, it's because the offense is efficient. They're going down the field, and every single first down for one of the guys gives the other guy a chance to do something beyond that. So it kind of leans into just my philosophy that I've kind of gained throughout the season of finding these offenses who elevate everybody since kind of fantasy production as a whole is we're seeing fewer of these like massive performances. But yeah, I think the correlation between these guys is great. I think they're both underpriced. They're definitely both underowned. And just I really want to bet on Tampa Bay's offense as a whole, kind of getting back to the level of production that we've seen over the last few years from them.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be that I was looking at. That's what I said. The chat had talked about it throughout. It all kind of pairs together, and that makes sense. I was looking at it, and I guess the Olave news really matters to me a little bit more, just because obviously if not, you can go to Vile, and you got Johnson there, and I love all that stuff. And you mentioned Godwin, Ibuka, Bucky, all in really good spots. Bucky kind of in a price range that you just can't get enough ownership on him. So I've got some interest regardless. I think, again, not that they go together perfectly, but if you landed on like a Bucky with a Juwan Johnson or something like that, I think that plays regardless. Like, I think those are good. But to put it all together, that is a couple of teams that love to pass, a couple of teams with horrible secondaries that you can pass on, and both with higher pace Interestingly enough, the total has come down quite a bit since open. So I'm not sure, again, just waiting on some of the news and seeing how it all shakes out and the quarterbacks involved, etc. But definitely like that spot quite a bit. But I am going to switch. I found some stuff here at the end and we talked about it, but I love me some Love. And I'm going to go to Jordan Love and Colston Loveland together. I'm not sure I'm going to fill out the middle yet because there's so many different ways you can go from stacking partners. I want to wait on the golden news, all of that. But I think I'm looking to at least leverage Jacobs in this spot for what that looks like. And it'll give me some flexibility in the afternoon, but I'm going to commit to Jordan Love and Colston Loveland and use up the onesie positions, at least there on the skill position. So I've got Jordan Love. I've got Colston Loveland. There's a ton of options you can put in and around them, but I like that, first look of the build. I think the last thing I'll say is just a couple spots. You mentioned the Cincy one earlier. I mentioned the Jags one. You mentioned the Tampa Bay New Orleans game. And then obviously the Cardinals game at home versus the Rams. There is some really good spots this week. You will have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, but remember what we said earlier. You've got all the thoughts. You've got all the ideas. Stick to the conviction. Once you get to the conviction, then make your moves from there, but don't go away. If you love the Buffalo Bengals game, then why are you moving off it at the last second only to go, watch them put up 53 points and be like, damn, I could have had that, or I was on that. Well, you weren't when you press submit, and that's the only time that it matters. So any final thoughts from you, my friend? I think it's a really good one. Went longer, but seems like people don't mind. So make sure to tap that thumbs up if you're watching this live. If you're watching it on playback as well. Leave in the comments what you love about the show. If you do love, the love is the theme. Love is in the air, my friend. But let us know. We appreciate all the feedback. Alex, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, those leverage lanes kind of work really well together, right? Because you mentioned how part of the philosophy of that stack is that it leverages Josh Jacobs. Well, if you're leveraging, $6,800 Josh Jacobs, go right to the Bucky Irving pivot at $7,000. It works really, really well together, and you can definitely fit that sort of thing. So yeah, that's definitely a build that I'm going to explore quite a bit.
Leverage lane, baby. We got there. We made it all work. And sometimes the things just, I told you that marketing angle, you got the Blick scored over there. We got leverage lane. Like Alex said, you guys can go check out his Discord. Check him out on X. Is it at Alex Blickle 1?
It is correct.
Alex Blickle 1 on X. Go check out the Blick score. Definitely use the code Turkey Day if you're doing so. Like you said, get the discount there. You can check us out, Ship It Nation. I mentioned off the top. You go to shipitnation.com. You can get the code SHIP19 you see on the screen if you want to just try out 5 days for $19. If you want to get any of our packages to round out the rest of the NFL season, these still exist with or without SaberSim and get you into Ship It games. But this is a fun one, guys. We appreciate you. As always, that's going to do it for this week on Leverage Lane. For Alex, for myself, ToeTagginTambo, let's ship it.